How's it going? Oh, we'll try one more time. It's Friday morning. Good morning. Yeah, that's better. How's it going?
Hey, look, thank you all for dragging yourselves out of bed at 9 o'clock on the last day of Ignite. I remember the previous years I've been here, the 9 o'clock session was always the hardest one to get to. So, some introductions.
Oh, well, hi everyone. I'm Malcolm from Aldhouse. I'm a technical trainer there. It's quite funny when Dan first put this together and he put this little icon together, I was like, yeah, I'd like to really knock that back, but that's actually me. I do text and ride my bike at the same time. I'm a trainer in the Office 365 space, in the Server 2012 space, Azure space as well, and yeah, together Daniel and I head up a group in Wellington called the Wellington Windows Infrastructure and Azure Users Group, and we've got to think of a smaller title at some stage. But and there's Daniel.
Cheers. When I found out he texted and wrote at the same time, I asked for a copy of his slides and demos on a USB key, just in case. So my name's Daniel Byers. I'm practice lead for the Cloud Consult team for Datacom down in Wellington, and I'm also a Microsoft VTSP, or in the States we call us P-sellers, but that doesn't work too well in New Zealand. So this session's about showing you how Azure AD and Intune can be used to manage Windows 10 devices over the internet. And we thought the best way to demonstrate this was to take a Windows 10 device, a retail device, and take you through building it up as a corporate device over the internet. So we went down to the HP stand down in the hub yesterday over drinks. Malcolm distracted them, and I grabbed the lightest laptop I could.
Yeah, but this time you better have a fast one. The last time we did this, it was so slow. So yeah, hold on a sec.
So if a whole lot of really angry looking HP people come into the room, there's no HP laptop up here, all right? So while Malcolm's unpacking all of that and getting it set up and plugged in, I want to tell you a story about Dave, okay? Dave's he's a interior designer specialising in industrial and corporate interior design.
The box weighs more than the laptop.
All of the applications that Dave uses are cloud-based applications. And he's a typical Kiwi. He works for himself. He owns his own organisation. Now, Dave's always wanted to expand his organisation out, but there's barely enough room in his home office for Dave, let alone having other staff there. But as luck would happen, last week, the hardware store down the road from Dave went up for sale. And so Dave put an offer in, and he purchased the hardware store. So now, Dave's got an awesome location to be able to start building his business up. Like a lot of small business owners, he doesn't have a whole lot of money left, especially after buying this hardware store. He definitely doesn't have enough money for new servers. But what he wants to do is he wants to have great devices for his staff to be able to use in the office and when they're out of the office talking with customers. But because he's a small business, he doesn't want his staff sort of mucking about with these devices too much. He wants them to be able to log into any of the devices that he has in the office, and he wants to ensure that those devices are all configured the same way. He wants to be able to manage it centrally. He wants people's settings to follow them as they log into different devices. So there's probably a lot of you in the audience going, that's easy. We put in a domain controller, do a bit of group policy, bit of management, bish bosh, job done, simple as. But what we want to show you is Dave now has another option. With Windows 10 and Azure AD Join, Dave now can have a very similar experience to having these machines domain joined on-premise. So what does Azure AD Join give us? Well, if we join our Windows 10 device to Azure AD, any of the staff in Dave's Azure AD can log on to that device seamlessly. And as part of that Azure AD Join, we can also control which of our Azure AD accounts should be set as local administrators on our device. Dave can also, and I like this one, block staff from being able to log on to a device. So if Dave wants to take the really nice laptop home to play Minecraft in the weekend, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, he can block log-ons to that device, so none of the staff can log into it. It's reserved for him. And I think the most important thing that we can do is we can force an MDM enrollment as part of our Azure AD Join. So we can force our device to enroll with our MDM. So in this case, Dave's decided to use Intune for that. Now, Microsoft have updated the management functionality we have in Windows 10 regarding MDM side of things. So with Windows Intune, we can now apply policies and settings to our Windows 10 device, and it's pretty much the same policies and settings that we can apply to our mobile phones as well. We can push software out to our Windows 10 device. And we can report on the health of the device. And I really like this. We can set a policy that defines whether our device is healthy or not, and then we can use that health status to control which of our cloud applications we're allowed to access. So we may decide that for our payroll application, for instance, actually we need the device to be compliant with our health policy. But for our intranet, actually it doesn't matter if your antivirus definitions aren't quite up to date. So we can control that on a per application basis. And most importantly, if we lose a device, we can wipe that device if we need to. And that's something we couldn't do previously with Windows 7 or Windows 8.
That's pretty handy, because how many of you have got bosses and stuff who lose laptops, or staff that lose, yeah, see, well, that's actually more hands than I kind of expected to see, but yeah, it's really handy. It was quite funny with Exchange Active Sync. I set up my boss's phone, and I said to him, oh, there's a section here that says, do you want me to be able to control it if you lose your phone? He says, no, nothing go wrong with that. So I went, oh, okay. Put a tick in the box and just carried on setting it up. So it's an important risk thing, so yeah.
So what does this mean for Dave? Well, Dave's staff are happy because they can log on to any device in the network. And as a byproduct, they get single sign-on to all of the cloud applications that are federated with Azure AD. Now, there's no ADFS in that picture, and we'll talk about how this works. Dave's happy because Dave can centrally manage all of his devices via Intune. He can do it at home with a glass of Merlot in the evening, and he can see if those devices are healthy or not. So you got it all plugged in, mate. You ready to do an Azure AD join?
Yeah, pretty much. So what I've got here, if I push the right button and everything works.
Hey.
There we go. So I've let the laptop go through post. All of you have seen that, and I assume most of you have seen this screen and done it a number of times as well. Look, the only reason is it's purely for authenticity. It is brand new, out of the box. End up, 6? There we go. Welcome to New Zealand. Alrighty, coming in through here. Legal stuff, that's the bit about losing your children to firstborn kids and that if something goes wrong. And here we go. Now this is one of the sections that's in our demos and practices, this has been the big stalling point, is of course if we go and get a whole pile of updates at this point, this is where it screws things up for us. So hopefully it won't take too long to get through this screen. So,
and I tried asking Microsoft, can you not release any updates on Thursday night? But apparently, there aren't enough people in New Zealand to say no on that side of things.
The odds are that this part's going to actually be the part that's going to take us a little bit of time to get through. Oh, hi, and we're in. Shouldn't be at a high screen just yet, but we'll see what happens. We're setting some things up for you, and I am going to put money on a nice big boot through. Critical updates, right. I'll switch back to you for half a sec and come back in a tick.
That's all good.
It's bound to happen live, isn't it? That you're going to get that happen.
So I'm going to tell you what's going to happen under the hood, and then we're going to flick back, and we'll see some of that side of things happening too. And we actually saw this in the keynote, so some of those screens you've already seen about doing the Azure AD join. But there's quite a few moving components that sort of make all this up. So as we go through, we've got our Windows 10 device, and we've got our Azure Active Directory, but we've also got our Azure Device Registration Service. How many people here have done a workplace join? Wow. Couple, awesome. So this is the same device registration service that the workplace join uses, and we've also got our MDM as well. So when we go through our OOBE, we get asked to put in our email address. And what happens is our Windows 10 device takes that email address and it goes up to Azure AD. And it says, is there an Azure AD for this domain? Is this domain owned by an Azure AD? And if the answer is yes, then the next question it asks is, does that Azure AD allow Azure AD joins? And if the answer is yes for that, then it prompts us for our username and password. And if we've enabled multi-factor authentication, and as Malcolm says, his girlfriend calls him up as he calls the MFA, we'll get prompted for our multi-factor authentication.
We'll hear from him soon. Yeah.
Now, if If that all passes, the next thing that happens is it checks to say, is Malcolm authorized to be able to perform an Azure AD join? And if he is, all of those things occurring, what we get passed back is a number of bits of information. So we get passed back a single sign-on token for the Azure Device Registration Service. We get passed the list of Azure AD accounts that need to be set up as local administrator accounts on our device. And we also get the MDM enrollment URLs for our device to go and enroll with our MDM. So, a Windows 10 device takes that single sign-on token and goes and connects up to the Azure Device Registration Service. The Azure Device Registration Service writes that object into our Azure AD. So we now have an object in Azure AD. It's kind of like a computer account from your on-premise AD, but it's different, but it's the same kind of concept. And then what gets passed back to our Windows 10 device is a device registration certificate. And that gets stored in the private computer store in our certificate store. Malcolm will show us that in the next demo. So, next thing that happens is our Azure AD accounts get set up as local admin accounts. And then our MDM enrollment agent gets fired up. And so that we don't get prompted for another username and password, that agent connects back up to Azure AD and it says, I'd like another single sign-on token, please. I'd like a single sign-on token for this MDM enrollment URL. So we get that back, and then we go and we hit our MDM solution, and our MDM enrollment occurs. Now, how many people in the audience use SCCM? Cool, we've got a few, awesome. And we all know with SCCM, it has that back-off built into it. So when you're trying to apply a policy, you've got that sort of 15 minutes to 60-minute wait so that all 30,000 devices, because we all have 30,000 devices in New Zealand, don't kill the server. Intune has a very similar thing. So our policies start flowing back down, but we have a delay of anywhere sort of between a few minutes to about half an hour or so for those policies to apply. Now, the staff member can be logged into the device and working on the device as that occurs. Right, Malcolm.
Hi. Literally 20 seconds before he finished with this, cut over to me. Oh, look, updates are ready. Yay! So I might as well just join it, go through the process,
and then we'll the other.
Here's one I prepared earlier just beside it. So, who hasn't seen this yet? Whole stumbling, everyone's seen this before. Right, so let's have a look at this.
Everyone went to the keynote.
Yeah, pretty much. When we were watching that, we looked at each other and went, great, that's fantastic.
I wanted to tweet out saying, thanks for the warm-up for the sessions.
Yeah, cool. So again, join Azure AD. There's a couple of little things I just want to focus on this little bit for you here. One of the things that I did as part of this whole setup, and I've written a loose blog outline on my blog, which we'll talk about later. I actually went and bought my own domain, and then I've gone and done customization on my domain. Now, if you are doing Azure AD, I recommend it, and there's a reason. Get one with a bigger keyboard next time.
It was light. I was going to have to run.
At MALCYJMC.
While Malcolm's doing that, you would have noticed he shows this laptop was owned by my organisation in the first screen. That's a really important one because you can only do an Azure AD join if you select that the device is owned by the organisation. Now, the reason for this, it's all about who gets ultimate control of the device. If you say, I own the device, then you can't do an Azure AD join because an Azure AD join essentially takes full control of your device. So obviously you have to say the organisation owns it, therefore they can lock me out. If you own the device, a workplace join is the most appropriate thing to do because that just protects the corporate data. It doesn't take full ownership of the device.
Yeah. And for everyone, I think exploring the workplace join, if you're in a Server 2012 R2 and 8.1 environment or Windows 10 environment, the workplace join's worth having a look at, okay? And publishing work folders, it's, yeah. The one thing I want to point out is if you look up the very top, I was about to say left because that's where I'm looking, up the top right-hand corner of the screen there, you'll see a little logo come up. That's part of my MCT customization for my MalkyJ MCT site. And it's just a little visual clue that it's actually recognized it. And what you're looking at is actually a web page, not actually one of the normal sign-in things. So if I click onto this, you've seen where this all goes from here. I'll end up with a phone call in a moment. Now this, interestingly enough, at that particular point, even though it's breaking the rules and it's texted me already, that is not a guaranteed delivery on the text message. But the phone call, however, which you'll hear in a moment,
Sign-in verification.
this thing.
Please press the pound key to finish your verification. If you did not initiate...
There we go.
I came into the speaker room yesterday, Malcolm was going, no, you push hash. Yeah. No, you push hash.
Alrighty. Now, look, just in a moment, that's going to carry on across into the next login screen, but in the interest of time...
So like every good cooking show, let's cut across to one we prepared earlier.
And hey, look, here's one we prepared earlier, and it's logged in and everything's fine, and this user here is still called Brent, just like the last user was.
So the first thing we want to show you is that device registration certificate that comes down.
Now, behind the scenes is part of your Azure AD, and we'll look at this later on, is I've actually set up 4 administrators, and I want you to have a look when we go into certs, or into local users in a moment, and we'll have a look at some stuff in there. Now, here are the certificates for the join to Azure, and
there's some ugly-looking certificates, mate.
Absolutely ugly. The reason being, so many certificates dished out by Azure AD, they've all been given really ultra-unique GUIDs, and really easy to identify. So when you're picking on and diving into certs, pretty straightforward to see those.
So if you're going into your machine and you're going, I don't know what this cert's for, I'm going to delete it, that's not a good idea because your workplace join's going to fail and all those type of things. So just, you can spot them because they look like the ugly certificates.
Yeah. That's cool. Now, the next thing is, of course, where would you all go to find out that you joined to a domain? What keystroke?
Typical trainer question, mate.
I know. Windows and pause. Alrighty. Now, the whole thing here with the system properties is you're still in a work group. All right, so even though you're joined to an Azure AD, it's not going to tell you that you're part of Azure AD through the traditional domain screen. All right,
so don't go here and go work group, my Azure AD join didn't work. Where do we go, Malcolm?
So for that one, we click into here and, using Windows 10 search, domain, and you'll notice here that we've got all the information about what domain you're in. And the top one here is actually a bit of a misnomer. It'll actually just bring up system properties again, so I'm just going to go into one that already exists. And you'll notice here that it talks about the organization that I'm joined to, and that's the one that says this is who's got ownership of this computer. So pretty straightforward again.
This is also where we go if we want to remove ourselves from our Azure AD.
Yeah, disconnect from all, that'll be a great part of the demo now. Yeah.
Right, let's go and have a look at those local administrator accounts.
So what we also have here, if we go and have a look at the local users here, under administrators, you'll see that there are, in fact, the 2 users who have logged onto here. Okay, so the 2 users who have logged onto this laptop are this dude called Malcolm and this dude called Brent. And you'll also notice that they've got great big long GUIDs after them, but you'll also notice 2 mystery meat ones. Okay. Now, the 2 mystery meat ones, we've been hacked. Yeah, these guys are throwing themselves in. In fact, in my Azure AD, I have 4 administrators so that any device that they log into in my Azure AD, they will become administrators. And until they log into this, they sit there looking like that. As soon as we log in as that user, they'll actually get a name associated to them as well. So it'll say
So don't
Azure
worry
AD.
if you go in and see these SIDs. It's not a fault. This is just the behavior and how it works.
And also, just as a bit of a heads up as well, they end up getting folders underneath local users too.
Yeah, so it's standard profile, everything else is the same. It's just you see those SIDs before someone's logged in.
Yeah.
Right, well, let's jump into Azure AD, hey Malcolm.
Yeah, I was just going to show that as well. Office 365, we have single sign-on. Straight away, we'll get into there.
Got my fingers crossed, mate.
Yeah. Oh, it works fine every time. So we'll get a single sign-in into here as well. We'll just let that log in for a moment. And Azure will also single sign-in as well to show the user that we're currently logged into. So yeah.
Cool, let's go and have a look on our Azure Active Directory.
Just give us, oh look, I just want to prove it worked. There we go. Cool bananas. And then yeah, down underneath here, under Malky JMCT, we'll just see that we've got all our users floating around in there. So,
cool.
Yeah.
So where were the domain settings, mate, that you had to go to make this all link up?
All right, so there are a number of things to have a look at underneath here. So for within our domains, you'll notice that the path, and please read about this in my blog because there was a lot of discovery to get this going. Daniel asked me and said, hey, do you want to do this? And I went, yeah, and then had to learn a whole lot of stuff.
And he admitted the week after that he didn't quite know as much as he might have said.
Yeah, pretty much. So the Malky JMCT on Microsoft.com, we've all seen that before. What I did is associated a real domain, malkyjmct.nz, and then I've imported that into Azure AD as a custom domain. And so as we have a look in there, that's where we've got our custom domain floating around here. Now, as well as all of that, the bit that says we're allowed to domain join and do the Azure domain join comes through from our configure options here. So, a few things to see inside this section. First thing is that I've got a challenge to say, yes, I do want to have multi-factor authentication. And some of these things do take a little bit longer than others, but just give it half a tick. I am on a wired network. Could not load that. That's all right. It's not
Scroll down.
work. Yep. All right. Devices is, well, it's the only section that loaded. It's the only section I needed. Okay, so what we're looking at here is require multi-factor authentication to join the domain. Sweet. Okay, and so that's where we got the text or the phone call message come through. You'll also notice in here that users may Azure AD join devices. And what I could do here is I could potentially go through and choose from the number of groups that I've got on my Azure AD and say that I want these guys to go through and do things. So Team Awesome for the people working on awesome things like Ignite and Azure AD.
So this is great if you're just starting to pilot Azure AD joins. You can create a pilot group of users that you can say only these staff are allowed to do a join. And you don't have to be an administrator to do a join. You can allow standard users to join their devices.
Yeah.
And Malcolm will show that in a minute, that Azure AD takes a slightly different approach. In on-premise AD, we have computer accounts, and they're not really associated with a staff member. But in Azure AD, devices are owned and associated to users. So we don't see devices as a big list. We go in and we see staff, and we see the devices that they've joined to our domain. So it's quite a different sort of way of looking at it.
And interestingly enough, here's a really big number. 20 devices I can set up to, you know.
So for some organisations, you may still choose to do that join on someone else's behalf. So Microsoft have lifted that number up so you can have a significant number of devices associated with a single account. But really, it's about having your staff do this because it's such an easy process, or have it scripted for them. So let's go and have a look at those user accounts, Malcolm.
Yep. So these guys float around in here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick on Brent, the logged in laptop here, as a look. Now, again, normal, what we'd see sort of on-premise, the basic, actually it's probably what most people only fill out in AD, first name, username, display name, and login. And what the roles are, and you'll notice that I've given him a role in the organisation as global admin, which is quite handy for him. And then moving over into here, you'll notice devices. And the first shot that shows you when you go and click on devices is it shows you the devices and the browser that they've used to log into that device, which is quite cool. So you can see I've used some strange browser at some point.
These are not our registered devices. There's a little trick here. We've got to click on the view.
Yep, and jump into here. So that shows how I accessed it. This shows what the actual devices are. And there we go.
So we've got one device, and it's an Azure AD join. For those of you that have done workplace joins, your workplace join devices will show up in the same place under your staff members' names.
Yeah, and the interesting thing here as well is we've just got a little bit of activity that we can monitor, of course, from Azure AD, and that we can see, you know, their activity, what they've done for the last few days. In this case, I think that's about a month's worth back, so, yeah.
So how do we link these up? Because I must admit, Malcolm and I spent about a week going, we've got Azure AD working, we've got Intune,
365 working.
How do we make it all hang together and have these automatic joins?
Yeah.
And Malcolm figured it out in the end.
Yep. So what we did is we've got, sitting underneath our domain here, we've got applications. And this basically shows us the whole list of applications that are hooked in here. So you'll notice that I've got Exchange Online, all the normal Office 365 stuff, plus the addition of Microsoft Intune. Now this only comes with Azure AD Premium that we can do this link in, just in case some of you are sitting there with the MSD and basic Azure AD and going, well, I don't see that ability.
So it's the premium edition which allows the enforced MDM enrollment to occur.
And the really tricky thing is you get a 30-day trial of premium, and just towards the end of it you go extend. Right? Just so if you want to get 2 months worth of playing with it, you can extend that premium trial. I didn't say that out loud, just one of those things. All right. Now when we log into or click onto Intune to have a look at some of the basics of the management of it here, what you'll notice is you'll see these things Daniel was talking about before, which is the MDM enrollment URL. It kind of works a little bit like auto-discover for Exchange. So it's going to say, okay, you've logged in as a user. We'll use the discovery service to go ahead and find out where your Azure AD is and help you join across to that. We're a bit lazy. We didn't bother filling out a terms of use URL, but we figured most people ignore it anyway, especially in my little network here. Nobody reads it.
So that can be any publicly facing website you have, and it just pops up as part of that OOB experience. And you guys all know that part of that OOB experience is now actually being served up by a web server from Microsoft. So it's not all stored locally anymore, which is why you need to have a network connection for most of that to work.
Yeah. And the only thing down the bottom there is saying, who do you want to manage devices for? And I couldn't be bothered segregating that out, so all users. So yeah, all right. Back
Awesome.
to,
Thank you, sir. You flip me back across.
Indeed.
Right. So one of the things we saw there was single sign-on to our cloud-based applications. Now, as I said, we've got no ADFS in this infrastructure. The reason that single sign-on worked is because of these things called primary refresh tokens. Now, for those of you that are used to Kerberos and Kerberos tickets, these are very similar in sort of concept to Kerberos tickets. They're the web version of a Kerberos ticket. So what happens? So Dave logs into his Windows 10 Azure AD join machine, and as part of that login, his username and password are authenticated up with Azure AD. And if his username and password are correct, what Azure AD passes back down is a primary refresh token. Now that token gets stored in the .NET ADAL cache on your Windows 10 device, and it's accessible for other applications which use the .NET ADAL cache. So Dave wants to go and access Office 365. So the Windows 10 device sends another request up to Azure AD and says, I'd like to request a single sign-on token for Office 365, and it uses the primary refresh token to create that request. So Azure AD looks at the request, makes sure that the primary refresh token is still valid, and if it is, passes down a single sign-on token. So now we've got two tokens, a primary refresh token and a single sign-on token. Very similar to on-premise, where we have our Kerberos ticket granting token and then our Kerberos tickets. So then Dave goes to access Office 365 and he gets signed in automatically. His Windows 10 device takes that SSO token, presents it to Office 365, it validates it, and he gets automatically logged into Office 365. So it's a really simple process. A few moving parts, but it happens so quickly that people don't see what's going on. If you want to have a look, you can look in your browser and go to your F10 developer tools, and you can actually, or F11, you can see the network trace and see all of the redirections occurring on that. Right, Malcolm.
Hi.
You talked about Azure AD. Do you want to take us through Intune, please?
Oh, right. Hang on a sec. Let's just dive over. What number is that? Number 1. Let's get that one out of the way. Hey, look, there's Intune. I'll just get rid of that one for now as well. Cool. Hi. Welcome to Intune. All right. So this is your basic Intune device. Now, we need to confess a little something about this particular laptop. So this one's failed dramatically. So I've just left it to do its own thing. Yeah, Windows, it didn't like starting up fresh like that. Now, in this particular laptop, what I've done that's a little bit extra that you won't get straight out of the box with an Intune join is I've actually brought down the Intune management agent onto this laptop as well.
That's right.
So we're going to see a couple of extra features in here that we'll see purely because this device has got the Intune management agent on it. And what that allows us to do is allow us to do a lot more remote management tasks than just a plain Azure AD joined device.
So you can still apply all the same policy. It just gives you a bit more depth to the data we get back.
Yeah, it just increases the telemetry options and that sort of thing. So here you're going to see some warnings. You've got devices with setting errors and that kind of stuff showing. Ironically, I'll show you that there's no problem with those settings, but that's okay as we go in. So I guess the first thing is what group or how do we manage these devices, right?
Yeah,
so,
where do they show up, Malcolm, once we've done our join?
What I did with a bit of faffing around is created, in groups here, I've created through the Intune console, I've managed to create a whole bunch of things in here, and the main one to have a look at here, I guess the overview is quite nice, shows me all the devices. I've got a bit of a scroll off to the right, okay? Now, if any of you are noticing, yep, it's in Internet Explorer because this needs Silverlight to manage it for now. It's getting updated in the next couple of months, but just for now, you'll need to use, of course, use Internet Explorer, which is the last browser to support Silverlight. Okay, so moving into here, we've got the laptops, and I get an overview of the laptops, the devices within this group, what their health issues might be, and I also get this endpoint protection status. Now, I don't get that just purely by joining Azure AD. This is the stuff that I've got to have the Intune agent in place for. So that's pretty cool. So that's the general overview. And floating around in here, now we come in and see the devices. So if I come into here and see the devices, I can see there's a mobile attached to this, and I can see that there's a laptop hooked up to this as well. So I'm going to have a little bit of a look through the laptop here. And what I can see straight away is I can see reports on this laptop. So it's a really nice way of reporting back on those laptops that are out there. And I can see that there are 5 new updates that need approval. I have a funny feeling we know that there are updates. If we come into here, it'll actually list all the updates. And, oh look, the top one's pretty useful. Office 2007 Service Pack 1.
Awesome.
Just what everyone needs. So yeah, much like playing around with maybe WSUS, CCM, I have the ability to go, actually, you know what? We want these ones. We don't want those ones. And I can actually push these out because of the Intune agent that's on this particular laptop. That'd be fun, wouldn't it? Moving along here as well, malware. Okay, so I can come through here and I can actually download malware updates and I can push those out. And some of the neat things in here is that I can remotely force this machine to actually have some stuff go on it. If there are any specific alerts, something's gone wrong with this computer, it will feed the information back through the Intune agent, and in this console I'll have a bit of a look and see what's going on there. So that's another very cool feature that floats around in there. I think one of the nice things here is we get a nice little, everyone remembers MS Info 32. How many people run off to that the first time you build a new laptop and just to have a look? So this is kind of that view of MS Info 32.
I really like this because we get a level of asset management here. We can look across and we can see the hardware in that device. We can get this information out. So when we're looking and going, hey, do we want to deploy that application, we can look across and go, is our fleet capable of running it? Yeah. So it's
and
it covers a number of different areas.
Bit of serial number tracking. Wow, that's a fast laptop. Any deployed software that we might have out there as well, and they're seeing a lot of nameless stuff here. This is all just the drivers that have applied across to this laptop, so that's pretty straightforward as well, I think. All right, and over here, any of the policies that we've got that have come onto this laptop.
So these are the Intune policies that we're applying down to the device. And obviously we've been having a bit of a play, so there's a fair few policies deployed down. But how do we push these to policies? How do we target them to devices, mate?
All right, so what we've got down the bottom left-hand corner in the details pane of Intune, we've got the policy. Well, let's go and have a look at this. So in my muckings about, we'll just wait for the overview to come through. Hello, it'll be there in a moment. Let's go to configuration policies and just cut and take a shortcut. All right, so what I decided here, we were playing around and I just thought, mucking about, nice, easy policies that we could apply and see them come up fairly quickly. What would be some useful ones? And firewall settings, right? So we want to make sure that people have got their firewalls turned on, so we can do that for all of the profiles and so on. Some of the things that I did in here were quite cool, like basic internet settings. I've gone through, created, and you'll notice here the Microsoft Intune agent settings. Now that's purely, again, because this guy's a little bit different to the out-of-the-box build. And I added 3 Wi-Fi profiles. Has anyone done that before? NetSH, export out Wi-Fi? Show of hands? Not so many? Cool. So I figured that would be useful, right? So setting that up for, they can take their device home. And one of the cool things, of course, is you're sending them home with a Windows phone. So why not set up, like I've got here, which I call the roaming Wi-Fi, and that one's actually the details of this phone.
So they can tether to that phone wherever they are without having to even worry about what the password was, right?
Yep. And if nobody's done that sort of thing before, it's really quite straightforward. What happens is you export it out using NetSH. It's a bit dodgy because you do clear text, which means that you actually see your passphrase. But what's really nice about it is that when the user gets to using Wi-Fi, all they do is they find the network they need to connect to and they just hit connect. So it limits those phone calls that you'll get, as they arrive in New York saying, I can't tether to my phone, help me. And you go, that's great, it's 3 a.m. here, thanks for your call. So, that's the kind of stuff. And that one actually involves an XML file that's imported in. So, and the main reason is I chose 3 different types of policy that would be a little bit on the trickier side.
So how do we make a new policy, mate?
Well, that's easy enough. Sort of. No, I mean, it is actually really straightforward. So I reckon we'll start off with the easy one, eh?
Yeah,
start off with
let's go
a
easy,
simple one.
then go hard.
Yeah, all right. So, yeah,
It's
what we're going to
9
do here...
o'clock on a Friday morning. So,
Yeah, I'm wide awake. All right, so Windows. Okay, and what you'll notice here is that we have a number of different policies because of the fact that Intune is designed to work across platform. We can limit people back on what they can do and that sort of thing. Alrighty, what was I going for? Windows configuration policy, that'll work, eh? And create policy.
So what this does is it's actually just choosing the policy template type that we want to select, and then we can go in and we can configure the settings within that template type. And we can have as many policies as we want. So just like group policy, there's some decisions to be made around how many settings do I put in one policy versus breaking it out into multiple policies. And in fact, when these policies come down, they actually get converted into local group policies. So you need to look at your organisation and decide what works for you, one big monolithic policy or individual specific policies.
Yeah, and actually the session after ours, if this interests you, you should hang around for, because Alan Birchall is going to explain
That's right.
a little bit of the Intune policy, a little bit of the group policy, and just discuss how those can possibly sometimes conflict as well. So he's addressing those issues. So, yeah.
And as you can see, it's really simple: sliders, tick boxes. This is the simple one, right?
What should we set on?
Well, let's go and show the hard one, Malcolm, because
Well, I'll go set something on here nice and hard. What do I reckon? Work folders URL? That'll do. It's just an easy way to show you what it is. And put it in.
this is when Malcolm applies a policy to the laptop he's demoing on, and in 2 minutes' time it stops working.
I actually did that yesterday.
He did.
I applied a policy to enforce UAC to maximum level, and this laptop went, oh, great, got the policy. No, lights out. And I went, oh, good. I quickly deleted the UAC one. Now, after you create the policy, it turns around and says, do you wish to deploy this policy now? I'm going to be rather foolish here and say yes. And it's going to ask pretty much, you can really liken the user groups here and the groups that you see here, you can liken them to OUs if you like. Okay, and what we've got to do is attach the policy to the OU. That's a real simple thing to do. So I'll add all the laptops into that, done. And in about 5 to 20 minutes, and we've got enough time for us to escape before that happens, in about 5 to 20 minutes, this laptop will actually get that policy updated, unless I go through and enforce the policy updates, which I'll show you I can do through management in a little
Why don't
bit.
we go in and do the
hard
complex policy first?
Yeah. Now, it's so funny. Daniel's quite the character. We did a demo of this at work, and it was all very, very good and well. And then Daniel said to me, that's great, Malcolm, but can you tell me what OMA stands for?
I thought it was an obvious question.
And I'm standing in front of all of my colleagues, and I went, I have no bloody idea. Anyway, Open Mobile Alliance.
There we
You all
go.
knew that, right? OMA? Yeah. See, this guy's going, yeah, sure. Ed knew. Okay, so what we've got here is we have Open Mobile Alliance. Now, what's really cool about this, Wikipedia is a great source of information, and all of it's true. But that's where I found it the most. This is a standards organisation, and it's across platforms of all multimedia, or mobile devices and that kind of stuff. So, in other words, everyone's building to a standard.
Everything's going towards these OMA-compliant policies. But they're a little bit more complex, aren't they, Malcolm?
Oh, just a lot. Yeah. So with these ones, when I was faffing about, I thought one of the really cool things I want to do is block people from doing autoplay. And I thought, well, how do I stop people auto-running CDs in media? And I'll show you the effect of that later on. And then you learn that it's one of these settings. And if we come down here, you'll notice add one or more OMA URI settings. Now, like, really cool. Here's my big tip to you. You simply go click on this little link here, and it takes you to TechNet. Yay! And as you come into here, you'll notice how small the little scroll icon is there. As we scroll down, you'll see what they all are and how they work. Okay? So they give you URI full path. Okay? And the URI full path is basically saying whereabouts is going to find that information setting. And
So it's a little bit like XML, essentially. We've got to copy and paste in these URIs with the variables and the settings, and they get passed down to the CSP on the machine and then processed. So there's not the same level of sort of web wizardry around these OMAs as there are around the other more group policy-based settings. So it looks a little bit daunting at first, but if you fill your nose and go through and look at those OMA URLs, it's actually not that complex to come and set these things up. But yeah, we wanted to call it out because it can look a little bit scary to start with.
All right, what are we looking for there? That was an integer one, wasn't it? There we go. And it had that thing there.
So a good bit of judicious copy and paste.
I absolutely love this screen too, because it's expecting a little value, and it gives you this great big text box for the number 1, and it gives you this tiny little line for the actual OMA URI. So I was like, that's cool.
When we did the demo, yes, I'm like, is there supposed to be more, mate? Is it going to work?
I couldn't actually see the OK button there, so I just took a punt. That was what I was on. All right, so once we've got that there, you can see it's all pretty straightforward, and I can choose to save the policy here. And it says, do you want to deploy the policy now? Sure, why not? So as we come into here, again, I'm just going to apply it to the laptops, choose Add, and choose OK. And there we go.
Brilliant.
Well, just while we're here, I just want to quickly just point out one more thing. Daniel was talking before about compliance policies for health. Right back at the beginning, you mentioned, he talked about the your HR system, payroll, and that kind of stuff. If we have a look here, compliance policies, just to give you an idea, we can go through and set those compliant policies. And now with the idea that NAP is disappearing from Windows Server...
Actually, how many people in the audience have used network access protection? Awesome. There are a couple of people that have used it.
Well, that's good. And as you know, part of setting that up is the MPS and your HRAs and all that kind of stuff. Well, if you don't...
It is good, but it's probably not good for those people that used it, because it's being depreciated now, right? So
but yeah,
you don't have it in Windows 10.
Yeah. So the cool thing is, though, if you're doing this with Azure AD...
That's right.
You've got the ability to control the health of those devices. So, yeah, just as a little point out there, so that's cool. And I've just noticed we're a couple of minutes ahead. So what I'm going to do is just show you one quick thing here, which I can do because the Intune management tool is on here, on this particular laptop, is that I'm actually able to click onto this laptop that I've just managed, and from the right-hand side here, I've got remote tasks. This only shows up if the Intune agent is running on the laptop you're managing.
Please don't choose white.
No, I've done that before. It just doesn't look so good on stage. Many times. Restart computer's fine though, right? Yeah. So what I can do here is I'm not going to because of what happened yesterday, once bitten, twice shy, but I can refresh the policies here, and it's pretty much like a GP update force, except for the fact that there will definitely be a bit of a latency. And the worst I've seen is 20 minutes. The best I've seen is 2 minutes, okay, which was yesterday when I enforced UAC. It went like that. So,
cool.
Yeah, there you go. I think that's pretty much all we were going to talk about in that section.
Thank you, Malcolm.
So back to you, man. Number 7.
Switch us back.
Ta-da!
There we go. Right, so we've talked a lot about a world without on-premise domain controllers, but actually Azure Active Directory and domain controllers get on pretty well together. And so the next little segment we want to talk about is Susan. Now, she's an airport radar engineer, and she travels heaps. Whenever her organisation signs up a new radar deal around the world, Susan has to jump in one of these things and go and start the project up. Now, she can be away for months at a time with these big radar deals. And while she always has good internet access, she struggles to keep her laptop updated over the company's VPN. She jumps on, she gets her emails, jumps back off, and it's not really enough time for the laptop to update itself. And in fact, what happened the last time she was away, she came back to the office and it had dropped off the domain because she'd been offline for so long. She couldn't actually log in for the morning. Now, Susan's organisation's invested a lot of money in their on-premise directory infrastructure and System Center Configuration Manager. But what they've decided to do is they've decided to synchronise their AD with Azure Active Directory. So Susan now has an object, an account object in Azure Active Directory. And they've reconfigured SCCM into a hybrid mode with Intune. And what they've decided to do is they've decided to move Susan's laptop to an Azure AD joined device. But what's the experience going to be like for Susan? We know that she'll get single sign-on to her cloud applications, but what about her on-premise applications? How's that going to work for her? So we know when Susan logs into the device, it's now going to hook up to Azure AD, and it's going to pull down a single sign-on token. But this is the really cool part. If she's on-premise and her device detects that it can communicate with an on-premise domain controller, it will also connect to that domain controller and perform a Kerberos user authentication against the DC. So it's not joined to the domain. The device has no relationship with the DC, but as we've all seen when a staff member brings a laptop in from home and manages to access their work applications, our Windows 10 device takes her username and password, connects up to that DC, authenticates her, and gets back a ticket granting token. So now, on Susan's Windows 10 device, we have a single sign-on token, which for our cloud applications, our primary refresh token that gets our single sign-on token. And we also have our Kerberos ticket granting token, which means that we can grant Kerberos tickets so Susan gets single sign-on to her on-premise Kerberos-based applications as well. Now, I think this is pretty key because there's no ADFS in this infrastructure. From her Windows 10 device, she's getting single sign-on to the cloud and single sign-on to her Kerberos applications as well, which I think is pretty cool. Hey, Malcolm, shall we jump back in? Don't even bother with that one and show
I'm
us
not
what it
even
looks
bothering
like.
with that one. Okay, so basically what's happened is Thursday night updates have come through and this laptop's been fighting for the last 4 I was really hoping to show you, but yeah, you know, those things happen. What are we doing? We'll have a look at the settings applied, right?
That's exactly right, mate.
So we've got a couple of things that I can show you quite, pretty quickly off the bat here. One of the things I want to show you, and again...
You cut across the screen?
Yeah, eventually, yeah. One of the things I thought would be quite useful here is to just have a look at those Wi-Fi settings just to show you how they come through. So I think this actually, it's one of those overlooked things. I, in my job, deal with end users as much as I deal with architects and that kind of stuff. So I have that good spread, and I know that from both sides of the camp, these roaming settings are a bit annoying. So,
hey, which are more painful, mate, users or architects?
Users, definitely. They both come with their quirks. There's an on-the-spot question I wasn't expecting. All right, guys. So what I've got here is there are 3 networks in here which are part of the rollout that I did. Old House. So we've got that one floating around in there. I've got the Nokia Lumia 830-6193. So if we're shipping that out for our clients, they're there. And I've also got SophieNet, which is my home network, and we're providing routers to all our staff as well, so I can get free wireless at home.
So some of these say can't share.
Yep, so these ones I've locked. The Sky City Wi-Fi, of course, will be locked out because when I joined that, I said don't share. But by default, the Nokia, and SophieNet, I've made sure that our people can't share those. So a little while ago, Daniel highlighted me to a fact, and we sort of did a bit of research on it. How many of you have seen the idea that you can share your Wi-Fi contact information with like your Facebook friends and stuff? Yeah?
How many of you like that idea?
Wow, handful.
Brave, good, I
Yeah.
like it.
Cool. How many people think that's a really terrible idea and are warning your staff about it? Double hands at
As
the
we
back.
So Malcolm's deployed
Yeah.
these wireless settings via Intune, and as
Yep.
part of that, he's locked it so that they won't automatically share those
Yeah.
credentials across.
Because we definitely don't want them to do that, so that's cool.
What were some of the other settings that you applied?
And the other real main one, which is a real let's have a look moment, because I've actually fiddled with a couple of things on here, is under settings. Oh, I'm in settings. Wait a minute. In settings and in devices here, I've gone to autoplay and disabled autoplay. Now that was an OMA URI setting to disable autoplay. Now, it's quite a common group policy thing to disable auto run. It's one of the things that James down here and we teach that a lot, disable auto run, disable auto run. The security, well, what is the risk? Can you just plug that into your laptop?
I found one of these in the lift yesterday,
Yeah.
actually, and went to plug it in, and Malcolm's like, oh, stop.
Yeah.
Have you turned off autoplay?
So, yeah.
Maybe. Can I plug it into yours, Malcolm?
No. That one you can do whatever you like with now. So that's just a couple of the real visible settings that we've set there to lock
Now,
stuff
where
out.
does someone look for the log files?
So now, this is an interesting one. Because this machine, again, has got the Intune client loaded on it, we end up having a logs location. Now, the whole thing is that, let's have a look at, everyone knows this one, right? Sing along if you know this one. But the logs don't live there. That's handy. I was waiting for the mouse to come off that screen down onto this one. I'll wake up today some stage. Right, logs, shortcut. Program files, Microsoft, online management, logs.
So if you're looking in the event viewer, you're not going to see some of the logs. You want to go into the program files, into here, and see all the logs for that Intune agent. So it's just in a slightly different place.
And it's exciting.
Yeah, you can scroll through and look to your heart's content, just like all log files. They're incredibly verbose, but it is helpful if you're doing troubleshooting as to why something's not applying. You can see the policies coming down, being converted to a local policy, and then being applied.
Yeah, yeah. But yeah, so I'd say they're the tangible ones that we can see. So yeah,
Sweet.
let's
cut us back across.
back into you.
So there's one more story I want to share just quickly, and it's one of my customers. And one of my customers, they give staff desktops to take home to use at home. Now, they don't have a VPN, and these desktops are all designed to run inside the corporate network. So as soon as they leave the corporate network, they suddenly start becoming this really unloved device that can sit at a staff member's house for 2 or 3 years with no updates and no management, and they sort of become the lost fleet of devices. And then you go to roll the operating system in sort of 4 years' time, and you come across all of these things on an asset register that you don't really know where they are or what's happened to them. And this is why I'm really excited about Azure AD Join and Intune, because it allows organisations to extend their management boundaries beyond that traditional corporate network out across the internet. So this customer, they could have had all those devices Azure AD joined and managed by Intune, and they would have kept that management oversight across them. They could have locked the devices, ensured they were healthy, because staff use these devices for doing their work, yet there's no control anymore across those devices. So I think there's a really sort of powerful use cases in large organisations as well as small.
Sneak it back to work and plug it in at their desk and bring your network down.
Yeah, exactly. So look, what we've shown you today is with Windows 10, Azure AD, and Intune, we get desktop management in the cloud. And what we'd like you to all do is go and try this in your test environments. See how it can work for yourselves. Have a play and look at the scenarios and go, where can I use this and how can it extend that management boundary across? Hey, look, I'd like to thank you all for coming today, getting up at 9 o'clock in the morning. We really appreciate that. There are some other good sessions on that we'd just call out. Windows 10 with group policy, Alan Birchall, we talked about. In-place upgrades for Windows 10. If you want to come and ask Windows 10 questions this afternoon, I'm in a session this afternoon with a bullseye on my T-shirt, I think, for asking questions. Microsoft Virtual Academy is a great place to go to learn more information. These slides will be up on Channel 9 in the next couple of days.
And there's links to both our blogs on there as well. So yeah, blogs for builds, how we got to where we were, and yeah.
That's right. And please complete your session evaluation. There are still some good prizes to be won, and we really appreciate your feedback as speakers so we can improve. And the last thing I'd like to do is to thank Malcolm. Malcolm stepped up sort of 3 weeks ago after I had a bit of a speaker crisis and said, yep, Dan, I'm happy to help you out and do those demos.
Yeah.
2 days later, he said, I don't know too much about Intune, but I'm a trainer, so it'll be fine. So I really appreciate that, Malcolm.
Oh, that's good.
Thank you all very much for coming.